This is a B6 video looking at inheritance, variation and evolution, and we're looking at some triple content, which is the theory of speciation. And before we get onto that, we need to talk about Alfred Russel Wallace. We can just remember him as Wallace. He was doing some separate work to Darwin, looking at natural selection, and he felt that he had also got enough evidence to prove those ideas of natural selection using the idea of mutations, sometimes bringing about good features that are then passed on to offspring. He then worked together with Darwin, and then following that, Darwin published Origin of the Species. Wallace then worked worldwide gathering evidence for evolutionary theory, and then he is best known for his work looking at warning coloration in animals. More importantly than that, and this leads into why we're talking about speciation, he then looked at the theory of speciation. And this is the idea that individuals of the same species can adapt to their surroundings and eventually become so different they no longer successfully interbreed. Okay, so what we're looking at on this slide is a definition really of becoming a new species, of speciation occurring, which is where two species that have the same common ancestor then become so different, maybe because they've been in different geographical situations, different environments, that they've adapted so much over generations and generations that when they come back together again, they can breed to have an offspring, but that offspring is infertile. So we say that they are no longer successfully interbreeding. Okay, when they can produce that offspring, but the offspring is infertile, we say that that common ancestor has evolved so much in those two populations that they've actually become new species. We can see at the top right picture here is a picture of a zedonk. This is found at Colchester Zoo, and this was where a donkey and a zebra mated together. Because they had the same common ancestor, they were able to reproduce, but the zedonk that was produced is infertile, so it's not successful interbreeding because it's infertile. Okay, so that's because the donkey and the zebra are separate species. Now on this picture as well, we can see an evolutionary tree. Sometimes these can be almost 90 degrees anti-clockwise. So you've got the different species at the top, and then the branches come downwards. But just to give you an idea that sometimes it can be reorientated. And we can see here similarities between these species that have a common ancestor. And on the left-hand side of that picture, that is the longest time ago. So that was when we didn't have all these different species, they just had the one common ancestor. And then gradually over time, through adapting to their surroundings, those mutations and natural selection, they've become separate species. And if we look at the two zebras at the top, they are the most closely related because their branches are the shortest, so they have become separate species in the most recent time. And just at the bottom there's actually a timeline on it, so you can say that towards the right of the picture is present day, and towards the left of the picture is a long time ago when they all had they were all part of that common ancestor. Okay, so let's talk through as if we had a 6-mark question on speciation. So the first thing that we've got is we've got our single ancestral interbreeding population. So this is the population that is the common ancestor that hasn't changed. They're successfully breeding together, meaning that the offspring that they produce can reproduce again. Second stage, they are geographically isolated. Okay, so this could be that they have been split by some kind of event and they're now no longer living in the same area, and they have to then adapt in order to survive in their new area. So that population that were all happily interbreeding together have now split to become two separate populations. the conditions where they've gone to are different, okay? So they've started adapting to their new environment. And this kind of links into the video I talked about natural selection, where I was talking about Darwin's finches all going to those different islands in the Galapagos and then adapting to the different food sources. They became separate species. They went through that process that we call speciation. When they came back together, they could no longer interbreed. Okay, so the conditions in those geographical isolated areas are different, so they start adapting to those new environments. The next point is a summary of natural selection. So we're bringing in Darwin's theory of natural selection, which he called survival of the fittest. The best ones live longer to pass on their traits. So I've summarized that there. So a mutation occurs if it's a beneficial mutation, if it produces a beneficial feature, the organism will live longer. Okay, and then the organism has more time to reproduce and pass on those traits to its offspring. Okay, so mutation occurs, beneficial features result in organism living longer, the organism reproduces, passes on traits to offspring. So we've kind of got that mini 3 marker of natural selection within this 6 marker that is the speciation answer. So each of those populations that was separated at the beginning is now evolving to their environment. So they're both evolving differently depending on what the conditions are like in their new environment. And so if we were to bring those populations back together again and they were to breed, the offspring that they produce, if they are infertile, we can say they have become separate species. Okay, so we bring those populations back together after they've been geographically isolated for lots and lots of time. And when they reproduce, if they make an offspring that is infertile, they have become separate species. That is speciation. Okay, so they've no longer successfully interbred together. If the offspring that they do produce is fertile, then they haven't actually evolved enough to warrant calling them separate species. Hope you found that useful. Thank you.